Every young racing driver has one dream, just one pinnacle they're all aiming for. Not Le Mans, not NASCAR, not IndyCar, it's Formula One. But what if that dream came with a price tag so steep that only a handful of families on Earth could even entertain it? Getting into F1 is like trying to climb Mount Everest while juggling flaming swords. Skill matters, but so does money, politics, timing, and a whole lot of luck. Most climb their way up from humble beginnings, scraping through junior categories, fighting for every sponsor. But what happens when someone skips the fight, slides past the queue, and buys the golden ticket straight into the big leagues? That's exactly what happened when one billionaire father decided his son wasn't just going to dream about Formula One, he was going to own his way in. Enter Lance Stroll. The name alone stirs reactions, groans, memes, eye rolls, and plenty of heated debates on forums. Some call him a fraud, others say he's just misunderstood. But whether loved or loathed, one thing's undeniable. No driver has embodied the term pay driver more controversially in the modern era. Yet, there's a twist to this tale, because for all the eye-watering cash that greased his path, there's also genuine skill, flashes of brilliance, and a journey more complicated than most people realize. The story starts with money, and not just any money. Lance, born Lance Strollovich, comes from a family so rich that words barely do it justice. His father, Lance Stroll, is worth about $4 billion. That's the kind of wealth that makes Ferrari's price tags look like pocket change. With stakes in high-end fashion brands and a business portfolio that stretches across continents, Lance wasn't just rich, he was F1 entry-level rich. This wasn't the type of wealth that just bought fancy houses and yachts. It bought influence, access, and most importantly, in motorsport time. While most young drivers hustle for sponsors and scrape together budget season by season, Lance had a career plan that was bulletproof from day one. Lance didn't just support his son's dream, he engineered the entire pipeline for it. Private jets to races, hand-picked driver coaches, access to elite training facilities, the Strolls didn't play catch-up. They built their own lead. In a sport where fractions of a second cost millions, Lance never had to worry about the cost. There were no compromises, no second-hand carts, and certainly no second chances. Just a well-funded ascent straight to the top. For Lance, Formula One wasn't a risk, it was an investment, and Lance was the product. And that kind of backing, that level of protection, turned every racing series into a stepping stone rather than a proving ground. This wasn't just privilege, it was a customized, carbon fiber-lined golden staircase straight into the world's most elite motorsport. Teams noticed, not just because of the money, but because the money moved things. Wherever Lance went, the paddock didn't just see a young driver. They saw the financial power behind him, and that financial power didn't knock on doors, it kicked them open. Unlike most drivers who begged for simulator time or fought over testing slots, Lance had entire programs built around him. His presence in junior categories was like racing with a supercharger bolted onto every part of his career path. By the time he was knocking on Formula One's door, that knock wasn't a question, it was a statement. The Strolls weren't asking to join, they were buying the keys to the gate. But before jumping straight to Formula One, Lance actually started out the traditional way. Like most drivers, he got his start in karting, racing competitively at the age of 10. And credit where it's due, he was winning. He bagged titles in Canada and North America quickly. At just 11 years old, he was accepted into the prestigious Ferrari Driver Academy. That's not a door that just swings open for anyone. At that point, he was racing against young guns like George Russell and Nyck de Vries, both of whom eventually made it to F1. Though both beat him on track, the early exposure gave Lance experience and access that most kids could only dream of. With Ferrari's backing and his father's checkbook, he made the jump to single-seaters early, moving up to Formula 4 with the Prema Power Team. Now, Prema isn't just any team. It's one of the strongest outfits in junior categories. And as it turns out, Lance Stroll was a massive investor in Prema at the time. Reports suggested he poured in nearly $60 million into the team to ensure Lance had every advantage. The best engineers, the best gear, the best of everything. For most kids, joining Prima is like getting into Harvard. For Lance, Harvard was moved to his backyard, and the strategy worked. Lance won the Italian Formula 4. It sparked immediate whispers across the paddock. Was this just good fortune, or was the entire setup designed to ensure Lance walked away with a title no matter what? It didn't help that his father had already become a major investor in Prima at the time, raising even more suspicions. It was the beginning of a pattern, controversy following success, and success always accompanied by an asterisk. And when future F1 drivers like George Russell and Charles Leclerc climbed the ladder the hard way, it only made Lance's path look more engineered. That's when eyebrows really started rising. Was Lance a skilled young driver making his way up the ladder, or was he a rich kid gaming the system with help from the shadows? From there, it was full throttle. In 2015, Lance jumped to the Toyota Racing Series in New Zealand and won that too. The same year, he entered European Formula 3 again with Prima, competing against future F1 stars like George Russell, Alexander Albon, Antonio Giovinazzi, and Charles Leclerc. And here's where the mixed signals start to intensify. He actually outscored Russell and Albon that season. Impressive, right? But he was nowhere near Leclerc or Giovinazzi, and more importantly, his time in F3 was marred by a series of high-profile crashes. At Monza, he caused a terrifying accident by squeezing Giovinazzi off the track. In Spa, he triggered a triple DNF, crashing into Felix Rosenqvist and two others. These weren't rookie mistakes, they were dangerous lapses in judgment. Yet despite the wreckage, there seemed to be no consequences. Why? Because Lance Stroll was already moving chess pieces behind the scenes. In late 2015, Lance was announced as a development driver for Williams F1, one of the most historic teams in the sport. At the time, a rumor floated around that Lawrence invested $10 million into the team. Williams denied it, of course, but by now, the pattern was becoming hard to ignore. It didn't take long for people to connect the dots. One of the richest men in motorsport quietly backing a struggling team, while his teenage son landed a development role. That wasn't subtle. And sure, the official statements insisted there was no money exchanged, but Formula One has always been a world where influence doesn't need a receipt to be real. People in the paddock knew what was happening, even if they couldn't prove it. Lawrence was playing the long game, and every move was positioning Lance one step closer to a race seat. He wasn't just investing in teams, he was investing in timing, relationships, and leverage. By getting Lance in as a development driver, it gave the young Canadian valuable access to Formula One technology, data, and team operations. He got to sit in on engineering meetings, absorb telemetry insights, and begin building rapport inside the garage before most juniors even touched an F1 car. It wasn't just about seat time, it was about embedding. And while other junior drivers were scrambling for simulator hours, Lance had access baked into the schedule. There was never a question of if Lance would debut in F1, only when it would happen. Every season in junior formulas started to feel like a formality, just a box-ticking exercise to justify the inevitable promotion. Critics started calling it the Stroll system, where results mattered less than resources. Some respected engineers and staff quietly voiced concerns, but no one wanted to bite the hand that could potentially fund their next development upgrade. And from Williams' side, bringing in the son of a billionaire wasn't just about talent, it was financial survival. Teams like Williams, historically rich but budget-starved in the hybrid era, needed capital as much as they needed pace. So the whispers of favoritism were drowned out by the louder sounds of bank transfers and development costs being covered. The business side of F1 had taken over the sporting side, and Lance was now part of the machinery. No shootouts, no head-to-head tests, just a smooth, executive-approved onboarding process. By the time the official announcement came, it wasn't a shock. It was simply the final piece clicking into place. And for many watching, it confirmed what they already feared. Formula One wasn't immune to being bought. It had just been rebranded. In 2016, Lance returned to European F3 and dominated, winning the championship by a massive margin. But again, the whispers wouldn't stop. At 18 years and 153 days, Lance became the second youngest driver to debut in F1, just behind Max Verstappen. He partnered with Felipe Massa in his rookie season at Williams in 2017. Things started poorly. He crashed during free practice 3 and missed the race start. But eventually, his pace improved. Getting thrown into the deep end of Formula One at just 18 wasn't just bold, it was borderline reckless for most drivers. The jump from Formula 3 straight to the pinnacle of motorsport is massive. His crash in free practice 3 wasn't just a rookie error, it was a wake-up call to the sheer brutality of an F1 weekend. Missing the race start only amplified the skepticism. Critics didn't hold back, calling him out for being unprepared, over-promoted, and in way over his head. But as the season unfolded, there were signs of resilience. While he wasn't blowing anyone away, he started finding his rhythm. Slowly, lap by lap. The learning curve was brutal, but he was staying in the fight, and that mattered. Being partnered with Felipe Massa, a seasoned veteran and former title contender, only added to the pressure. Massa's consistency and racecraft exposed Lance's inexperience on Saturdays, but it also gave him someone to learn from. The qualifying gap was wide, over 6/10 on average, but the racecraft was where Lance began to find some footing. His podium in Baku came out of nowhere, capitalizing on chaos, staying clean, and putting himself in the right place at the right time. It wasn't flashy or dominant, but it was clever, a rare trait for a rookie. And his front row start in Monza in the wet was one of those moments that silenced the critics, at least temporarily. He showed genuine skill in the rain, a trait often associated with natural racecraft rather than just experience or machinery. Still, consistency was elusive. There were weekends where he looked lost and out of sync with the car. But considering the weight of expectation and the microscope he was under, the improvements were notable. It wasn't a dream debut by any means, but it was enough to keep him on the grid and, more importantly, keep his father's billion-dollar plan alive. Surprisingly, he landed a podium in Baku. Finishing third made an incredible drive in chaotic conditions. He also qualified second at Monza in the wet, showing real talent in the rain, a skill that would become a quiet strength of his. But the raw pace wasn't consistent. Massa outqualified him 17 times in 19 races that year, with an average qualifying gap of over 0.6 seconds. And of course, there was the unforgettable moment during the cool-down lap when Lance, not looking ahead, crashed. After the race, it was the most Lance Stroll moment imaginable. In 2018, paired with Sergei Sorokin, expectations were higher. But Lance barely edged out his rookie teammate, being outqualified 12-8. The car was dreadful, yes, but even in a bad car, great drivers stand out. That just didn't happen. Yet somehow Sorokin was dropped and Lance was kept on. From the outside, it looked like a battle of equals. Two young drivers trying to survive in a car that had no business being on the grid. But even in survival mode, one of them had far more at stake. Sorokin, the rookie, had everything to prove and nothing guaranteed. Lance, on the other hand, had the family name and the financial cushion which silently shaped the team dynamics. Race after race, neither driver truly pulled away, and that said more about Lance than it did about Sorokin. If anything, the fact that a debutant matched him so closely raised even more questions. Was this a future F1 leader in the making? Or someone just holding station with no real upward trajectory? And while Sorotkin's one-season run ended with him out the door, Lance remained almost unfazed by the pressure. There was no public scrutiny from the team, no ultimatum, no real accountability. Just a quiet assumption that he'd continue, and that was becoming a theme. Performance mattered, but position mattered more. Lance wasn't driving to earn his seat, he was defending the one already purchased. Even as fans questioned the decision, the reality was clear. Lance was too valuable off-track to be removed from it. In a team struggling to survive, cutting the pay driver wasn't an option, no matter how average the results were. And so the pattern repeated. One driver moved on, and the one with a billionaire safety net stayed exactly where he was. What changed? Everything. Force India, a struggling midfield team, was on the verge of collapse, and right on cue, Lance Stroll swooped in and bought the team. He rebranded it Racing Point, and no surprises here. Lance became one of the drivers. Now backed by his father's own team, the scrutiny only intensified. In 2019, Lance was consistently beaten by teammate Sergio Perez, both in qualifying and race results. Still, he showed flashes like making Q3 appearances and a few decent overtakes, but in 3 seasons of F1, he had a podium, some rain performances, and not much else. The pay driver label refused to go away, yet Racing Point kept him on for 2020, and this time the car was something else entirely. Nicknamed the Pink Mercedes, it was a copycat of Mercedes' dominant W10, down to the bolt. That year, Lance had his best season yet. He finished outside the top 10 only once, took 2 podiums, and even claimed pole position in Turkey, a stunning performance in torrential rain. For once, critics had to admit that was real talent, but even then, Perez outperformed him. The Mexican took the team's only race win and beat Lance in both points and qualifying. Still, it was a step forward. Then came 2021. And another big change. Racing Point was rebranded as Aston Martin with big ambitions. Lance's new teammate, 4-time world champion Sebastian Vettel. It didn't go well, the car was poor, and Vettel, even past his prime, still outscored and outraced Lance over the season. Lance's best finish was 6th in Qatar. In 2022, the pattern repeated. Seb outperformed him again, both in speed and racecraft. But the big question came in 2023. With Vettel retiring, who would Aston Martin bring in? Lawrence chose another legend, Fernando Alonso, and the pressure was on. Could Lance finally silence the doubters against one of the most talented drivers in history? The year started with disaster. During preseason training, Lance crashed his bike in Spain, breaking both wrists and a toe. Doctors didn't think he'd even make the first race, but incredibly, he recovered, had surgery, and finished 6th in Bahrain. That was gutsy in one respect, but when the wrists healed, the results didn't come. Alonso was in a different league. He racked up 8 podiums. Lance had none. Alonso outqualified him 19-3. In points, it was 206-74. The qualifying gaps were brutal, including one shocking session in Qatar where Lance was 1.1 seconds slower in the same car. And frustration boiled over. During that Qatar weekend, Lance shoved his trainer in anger. Cameras caught the moment. The pressure was clearly getting to him. Crashes returned, as including a huge one in Singapore, and more contact during the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. Yet, somehow, he's still in the seat. Why? Because he's on a rolling contract. As long as Lance Stroll owns the team, Lance has a drive. So here's a question worth asking. Does Lance deserve to be in Formula One today? Based on junior results alone, maybe. On raw talent? There have been flashes, no doubt. On consistency and performance in F1? That's where the cracks show. Against elite teammates, Perez, Vettel, Alonso, the gap is always there. Oh, but here's another question. Would any other driver with his record still be in F1 after 8 seasons? There are dozens of talented drivers waiting in the wings. Young guns, F2 champions, endurance stars, and they aren't getting the chance. But Lance is still here, season after season, and that's why the pay driver label sticks. Because in a meritocracy, money isn't supposed to keep someone in the room when the results don't. And yet, the story isn't entirely black and white. Lance has had great moments. Baku, 2017, Turkey, 2020, Bahrain, 2023. He's battled through pain, pressure, and an internet full of memes. He's faced top-tier teammates and survived, even if not excelled. The F1 grid has seen worse. But with Alonso still around and Aston Martin fighting for podiums, how long can this experiment really last? At some point, even a billionaire father has to decide. Is this a Formula One team or a vanity project? The Lance Stroll saga isn't over. But one thing is clear, Formula One has never seen a driver quite like him, and may never again. If this deep dive into Lance Stroll's journey stirred up any thoughts, drop them in the comments. Is he underrated or just overstaying his welcome? And if you want to keep exploring the wildest, most controversial stories in motorsport, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next deep dive.